A lonely elderly woman agrees to live with her son and daughter-in-law, hoping to rediscover lost affection. But she soon realizes that the new home, despite its beauty, hides suffocating control disguised as care. When everything seems lost, an old friend reappears as a caregiver and plants the seed of doubt. Now, amid manipulation and secrets, she must reclaim her voice to free not only herself, but also her own son. Mrs. Teresa adjusted her shawl over her shoulders as she looked out the window of her small apartment in the Notting Hill neighbourhood of London. The surrounding hills seemed to embrace the city that March afternoon, and the sun was beginning to hide behind the slopes, tinging everything with a melancholic orange. She had lived there for 17 years, ever since she became a widow. The place was modest, but it was hers. Every corner held a memory, every object told a story. The peeling walls bore witness to old conversations, laughter that no longer echoed, silences that had become companionship. At 73, Teresa felt the weight of loneliness in a different way. It wasn't just the absence of people, it was the feeling that the world was moving on without her. Her friends had moved away or passed on. The neighbors were always new, hurried, invisible. She walked slowly through the cobblestone streets, held tightly to the stair railing, and increasingly realized that simple things required an effort that hadn't existed before. Opening a jar, changing a light bulb, carrying groceries, everything became a silent negotiation between body and will. It was on one of those afternoons that the phone rang. The voice on the other end was familiar but distant. It was Mark, her only son. He called from time to time, always rushing, always between appointments. Teresa had grown accustomed to his haste, to the short conversations that ended with promises of visits that rarely happened. But that day, something was different. Mark spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Mother, Patricia and I have talked a lot about you. We're worried. You living alone there, going up and down those stairs with no one around if something happens. Wouldn't it be better for you to come live with us? We have space, we have the means. You would be well cared for." Teresa felt a tightening in her chest. It wasn't the first time this conversation had happened, but before it was always a vague suggestion, something that hung in the air without a definite shape. Now, in his voice, there was a decision made. Patricia, Mark's wife, also spoke from the background, reinforcing the invitation with enthusiasm. "It would be wonderful to have you with us, Mrs. Teresa. The house is big. There's a room just for you. And I love taking care of people, you know. It will be perfect." Teresa hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no, wanted to defend her independence, her space, but another part, tired and fragile, longed for companionship, for human warmth, for feeling part of something again. She thought of the lonely nights, the days when she barely opened her mouth to speak, the solitary walks to the pharmacy. She thought of Mark, the boy he had been, the afternoons they played in the backyard of the old house. Was there still room for that affection? Could she rebuild something that seemed lost? "All right," she finally said, her voice almost a whisper. "I accept." The move happened in 2 weeks. Mark organized everything with impressive efficiency: truck, boxes, packing. Teresa watched her life being boxed up, reduced to numbered volumes. She left behind the larger furniture, taking only the essentials: clothes, photographs, a few books, the wall clock that had belonged to her husband. When the apartment door closed for the last time, she didn't look back. She didn't want Mark to see her tears. Her son's house was in Kensington, on a quiet, tree-lined street. It was indeed large, modern, well-decorated. Patricia greeted Teresa with a wide smile and long hugs. She was a woman of 40, tall, elegant, always impeccably dressed. She had that controlled manner of someone who likes order, planning. Everything in the house reflected this: the aligned paintings, the symmetrical cushions, the fresh flowers in vases. Nothing out of place. "Come, Mrs. Teresa, I'll show you your room. I prepared everything with great care." The room was spacious and bright, with a comfortable bed, a roomy wardrobe, and a window overlooking the garden. Patricia had placed flowers on the bedside table and hung light curtains that filtered the morning light. Teresa thanked her, touched by the attention. Perhaps everything would work out. Perhaps it really was for the best. In the first few days, everything seemed normal. Mark left for work, early, and came back late, exhausted. Patricia stayed at home taking care of things, supervising the housekeeper, preparing balanced meals. She talked with Teresa, asked about the past, listened to stories with apparent interest. But gradually, Teresa began to notice small details that bothered her. Patricia was always nearby. Always. When Teresa went to the kitchen to get water, she appeared. When Teresa wanted to go out into the garden, she suggested it was better to wait, that the sun was too strong or that it was going to rain. When Teresa mentioned calling an old friend, Patricia reminded her that the phone was out of order, that it was better to wait for the technician. The excuses were always reasonable, but the feeling of being enclosed grew. The schedules were also rigid. Breakfast at 8, lunch at noon, dinner at 7, medication at 10 in the morning and 9 at night. Patricia had organized a box with dividers for each day of the week, all the pills precisely separated. Teresa didn't even need to think. Patricia brought the pills with a glass of water and waited until she took them all. "It's important to maintain the routine, Mrs. Teresa, for your health. The doctor recommended it." Teresa didn't remember having seen any doctor recently, but Patricia spoke with such conviction that she didn't question it. Maybe she had forgotten. Her memory had been failing lately. Names, dates, small events. Everything seemed blurred, as if she were looking at life through a dirty pane of glass. One afternoon, Teresa looked for the photo album she had brought from Notting Hill. She was sure she had placed it on top of the dresser, but it wasn't there. She looked in the drawers, in the wardrobe, under the bed. Nothing. When she asked Patricia, she frowned thoughtfully. "Photo album? I don't remember seeing it, Mrs. Teresa. Are you sure you brought it?" Teresa hesitated. Was she sure? Or was this another one of those lapses? She felt the doubt growing inside her like a weed, coiling around her thoughts, suffocating her self-confidence. Mark, when he was home, seemed oblivious to everything. He spoke little with his mother, always distracted, always with his cell phone in hand. Patricia answered for her when he asked questions. "How's Mother feeling?" "She's great, isn't she, Mrs. Teresa? Eating well? Sleeping well?" Sometimes Teresa opened her mouth to answer, but Patricia had already filled the silence. The loneliness Teresa had felt in Notting Hill was different from the loneliness she felt now. Before, it was an empty but free loneliness. Now, it was a populated but caged loneliness. She was surrounded by people but never so isolated. One night, Teresa woke up thirsty. She got up slowly, trying not to make a sound, and walked to the kitchen. The house was dark and silent. She opened the refrigerator, the white light illuminating her tired face. That's when she heard voices coming from the study. Mark and Patricia were talking, but the tone was different. There was tension there. "You're exaggerating, Patricia. She's my mother." "I know, darling. But you have to trust me. I know what I'm doing. It's for her own good, and ours too." Teresa stood motionless, her heart racing. What were they talking about? She wanted to get closer, to hear better, but she was afraid of being discovered. She returned to her room in silence, lay down, but couldn't sleep anymore. The words echoed in her mind. For her own good, and ours too. What did that mean? The following days were marked by even more intense vigilance. Patricia never left her side. When Teresa picked up a book to read, she suggested another. When Teresa wanted to watch television, she changed the channel. When Teresa expressed any desire, Patricia redirected her gently but with unshakable firmness. Teresa felt like a child being guided, her choices being made by someone else. Autonomy slipped through her fingers like fine sand, impossible to hold. It was then that Mark announced he had hired a caregiver to assist in his mother's care. Patricia wrinkled her nose but agreed. The woman would arrive the following Monday. Teresa felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps another presence would change the dynamics of the house. Perhaps she wouldn't feel so watched, so small. On Monday morning, the doorbell rang. Patricia opened the door, and Teresa, sitting in the living room, looked up. When she saw who entered, her heart skipped a beat. It was impossible, but it was her. Helen, her childhood friend, the girl she had played with during summer holidays, with whom she had shared secrets and dreams. They had lost touch decades ago. Life had taken them down different paths, and now there she was, older, with grey hair, but with the same kind, attentive eyes. "Teresa?" Helen asked, surprised and emotional. "Is it really you?" Teresa couldn't speak. Tears came before words. Patricia watched the scene with a courteous smile, but there was something in her eyes, something Teresa couldn't decipher, something that looked like suspicion disguised as cordiality. Helen hugged Teresa carefully, as if fearing to break something precious. The two women remained like that for long seconds, an embrace that spanned decades of absence. Patricia cleared her throat, breaking the moment. "Well, I see you already know each other. What an interesting coincidence." Her voice had a controlled tone, but there was something more underneath. A contained irritation, a discomfort she tried to hide under layers of politeness. Helen pulled away from Teresa and extended her hand to Patricia. "I'm Helen Smith. I was referred by the agency to care for Mrs. Teresa. I had no idea it was her. We were friends many years ago." Patricia squeezed her hand harder than necessary, maintaining the artificial smile. "How nice. I hope this won't interfere with professional work. Here we have very specific routines that need to be followed strictly. Of course, I'm here to help in any way necessary." Helen had worked for years as a nurse and, after retiring, had continued to work as a private caregiver. She knew family dynamics well, the unspoken codes, the invisible tensions that inhabited seemingly harmonious homes. And from the first moment, something about that house bothered her. It wasn't anything explicit, but she had learned to trust her instincts. Patricia led Helen to Teresa's room and began listing the instructions. She spoke quickly, with surgical precision, pointing to the medicine box, to the notebook where she wrote down everything Teresa ate, to the schedules that had to be respected. Helen listened, nodded, but also observed Teresa's body language. The woman was huddled in the chair, eyes downcast, hands clasped in her lap. She seemed smaller than she was, fragile in a way that wasn't just physical. "Mrs. Teresa cannot receive visitors without prior authorization," Patricia continued. "We need to control who comes and goes. It's a matter of security." And the room phone was disconnected because she got confused with calls, called wrong numbers, got lost in conversations. Better this way. Helen frowned slightly, but didn't comment. Teresa looked up and met her friend's gaze. There was a silent plea there, a mute supplication that Helen understood immediately. Something was wrong, very wrong. When Patricia finally left the room, Helen pulled up a chair and sat beside Teresa. She took her hand, squeezing it gently. "So long, my friend. Look where life has brought us again." Teresa smiled, but it was a weak smile, laden with sadness. "I didn't know you worked with this. I started after I retired. I like taking care of people. It makes me feel useful. And you, Teresa, how are you feeling here?" Teresa hesitated. The words seemed stuck in her throat, but she needed to speak. She needed to trust someone. "I don't know, Helen. At first I thought it would be good, but now I don't recognize myself anymore. It's like I'm not myself. It's like someone has taken my place and I'm just a shadow." Helen listened attentively without interrupting. Teresa continued, her voice choked. "I forget things. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if they're making me believe that. My photo album disappeared. Letters I had saved vanished. When I ask, they tell me they never existed, that my memory is failing. But I remember, Helen, I remember." Helen felt a tightening in her chest. She knew that pattern. She had seen it before in other houses, in other families. The subtle gaslighting, the manipulation disguised as care, the control sold as protection. "You're not crazy, Teresa. I believe you." Teresa broke down in tears. It was the first time in weeks that someone had validated her feelings, that someone had truly listened to her. Helen hugged her, letting her cry, letting her release all the accumulated anguish. The following days were of careful observation. Helen performed her duties, followed the routines established by Patricia, but also paid attention to everything. She noticed that Teresa's medication had changed. The packaging was different from what was on the prescription taped to the refrigerator. She also noticed that Patricia was always nearby, always listening, always controlling. When Helen tried to talk to Teresa alone, Patricia appeared with some excuse. "I need to take her blood pressure now. It's snack time. It's better for her to rest." Helen began to investigate discreetly. When Patricia went out shopping, she searched the room, the bathroom, looking for clues. It was during one of these searches that she found something strange. In the bathroom cabinet behind stacked towels, there was a box of medicines that wasn't on the official list. They were strong sedatives, high doses. Helen photographed everything with her phone. Mark was an absent figure. He left early, came back late, and when he was home he seemed too exhausted to pay attention to anything. Helen tried to talk to him once, but Patricia appeared before she could say anything relevant. "Mark, darling, you look terrible. Go rest a bit. Helen and I will take care of everything here." He obeyed without questioning. Helen realized that he was also being manipulated in a different but equally effective way. Patricia knew exactly how to keep everyone in the place she determined. One afternoon, while Teresa was napping, Helen decided to explore the house. She went up to the attic, a place Patricia had said was off-limits due to a leak. But when Helen opened the door, there was no sign of dampness or structural problems. There were, however, stacked boxes, furniture covered with sheets, forgotten objects. She began to open the boxes, looking for something she didn't quite know what it was. It was in the third box that she found it, a photo album, Teresa's album, and with it letters yellowed with time, some torn, others still sealed. Helen opened one of them and recognized the handwriting. It was from Teresa's husband, Anthony, who had passed away years ago. The letter was addressed to Mark. "My son, if one day you feel you are being manipulated, look to your mother. She will see what you cannot. Trust her, and always be suspicious of anyone who needs to control everything to feel secure. True love liberates, it does not imprison." Helen felt a shiver. That letter was a crucial piece. But why was it hidden there? Who had hidden it? And why? She continued searching and found more things. Documents with signatures that seemed forged, receipts for bank transactions, a power of attorney granting powers to Patricia that Teresa would never consciously sign. Helen photographed everything. She needed proof, but she also needed to be careful. If Patricia became suspicious, everything could fall apart. She put the letters back, reorganized the boxes, and descended from the attic silently. When Teresa woke up, Helen sat beside her and held her hand. "Teresa, I need to tell you something. I found your album, and I found other things too, things that prove you're not crazy." Teresa's eyes widened. "Where?" "In the attic. Patricia hid everything there. There are letters, documents, proof that she's manipulating not only you, but Mark too." Teresa covered her face with her hands. I knew something was wrong. But why would she do this?" "I don't know yet, but we'll find out. Together." That night, Helen tried to speak with Mark, but Patricia once again intercepted. She realized that the caregiver was getting too close to Teresa, that the bond between the two was strengthening, and that was a threat. "Helen, can we talk for a moment?" Patricia led her to the kitchen, closed the door. Her face was serious, her lips tight. "I appreciate your work so far, but I don't think it's working out. You and Mrs. Teresa have an emotional bond that harms professionalism. I think it's better if we hire someone else." Helen felt her blood run cold. "But I'm following all your instructions." "It's not a matter of instructions. It's a matter of suitability. I'll talk to the agency tomorrow. Today is your last day." Helen wanted to argue, but she knew it would be useless. Patricia had already decided. She nodded, swallowing her anger. "All right, I'll say goodbye to Mrs. Teresa." Patricia hesitated but agreed. She accompanied Helen to the room. Teresa was sitting in the armchair looking out the window. When she saw Helen, she immediately realized something was wrong. "Mrs. Teresa, I'll have to say goodbye. My work here is finished." Teresa paled. "But why?" Patricia answered for her. "It's for everyone's best. You need someone more experienced, more prepared. Helen did a good job, but it's not ideal." Teresa wanted to protest, but the words wouldn't come out. Helen approached, hugged her friend, and whispered in her ear, too softly for Patricia to hear. "Don't give up. The truth is all around you. Trust what you feel." She discreetly placed something in Teresa's hand. Then she stepped back, said goodbye to Patricia, and left the house. When she reached the gate, she looked back one last time. She saw Teresa at the bedroom window, her hand pressed against the glass. A gesture of farewell or a plea for help. Teresa waited for Patricia to leave the room. She opened her hand and saw what Helen had left. A folded piece of paper, a note. She opened it carefully and read the handwritten message. "You're not crazy. The truth is all around you. Trust what you feel." And underneath, a phone number. "Call when you can. I will help you." Teresa put the note inside a book on the shelf, hidden between the pages. For the first time in weeks, she felt something beyond fear and confusion. She felt hope. The days after Helen's departure were the most difficult. Teresa felt even more alone, more lost. The new caregiver, Mrs. Yvonne, was a serious and distant woman who followed Patricia's orders with military precision. There was no room for personal conversations, for confidences, for humanity. Everything was protocol, schedule, rule. Teresa saw herself reduced to a list of tasks to be completed. But something had changed inside her. Helen's note, tucked between the pages of the book, was a constant reminder that she wasn't going crazy. There was truth hidden in the shadows of that house, and she needed to find it. Teresa began to pay more attention to everything. She observed Patricia with different eyes, noticing patterns, behaviors, small contradictions that had previously gone unnoticed. Patricia always spoke for others. When Mark asked his mother how she was, it was Patricia who answered. When Mrs. Yvonne tried to report something about Teresa's routine, Patricia completed the sentences before the caregiver finished. She was the official narrator of all lives in that house, the only voice that echoed through the walls. Teresa also realized that the medications continued to change. The colors were different, the shapes varied, but when she questioned, Patricia explained that it was just another brand of the same medicine, that the doctor had authorized it. One morning, Teresa pretended to take the pills. She held them under her tongue while drinking the water, waited for Patricia to leave the room and spat them into her palm. She examined each one, trying to read the tiny letters engraved on the surface. She didn't recognize the names. She put them in a handkerchief inside the bedside table drawer. She needed to find out what they were. That afternoon, when Patricia left for a meeting with the accountant, Teresa asked Mrs. Yvonne to take her to the attic. She said she wanted to look for a personal item, something she had brought from the old house. Mrs. Yvonne hesitated, but eventually agreed. She went up with Teresa, supporting her up the narrow steps. The attic was exactly as Helen had described in her thoughts. Boxes, covered furniture, a gloom that smelled of the past. Teresa walked among the objects, touching dusty surfaces, until she found the boxes Helen had mentioned. She opened the first, the second. In the third, there it was, her photo album. She held it against her chest, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't crazy, she hadn't forgotten. Someone had hidden it from her. Someone wanted to erase her memory, her identity. Mrs. Yvonne watched in silence, not understanding the intensity of that emotion. Teresa continued searching and found the letters. She took Anthony's letter, the one addressed to Mark, and put it in her dress pocket. She also kept some documents that seemed important to her, papers with signatures she didn't remember making. When they came down from the attic, Teresa returned to her room and asked Mrs. Yvonne to let her rest. She locked the door, sat on the bed, and read Anthony's letter. Every word was a punch to the gut. He knew. Somehow, before he left, he knew something like this could happen. He knew his son, knew his weaknesses, and had tried to warn him, but the letter had never reached its recipient. Someone had intercepted it. Teresa felt anger grow within her, mixed with sadness. It wasn't just anger at Patricia, but also at herself, for allowing it, for remaining silent, for doubting her own sanity. No more. She would no longer be a silent victim. That night, during dinner, Teresa observed Mark. He was pale, tired, his eyes sunken. He looked 10 years older than he really was. When he picked up his fork, his hand trembled slightly. Patricia placed her hand over his affectionately. "You're working too much, darling. You need to rest." Mark nodded, but there was something in his gaze, an emptiness, a deep sadness he tried to hide. Teresa saw in that moment that her son was also trapped, in a different way but equally suffocating. "Mark," Teresa said, her voice firm for the first time in weeks. "We need to talk, alone." Patricia looked up, alert. "Mrs. Teresa, Mark is exhausted. Maybe tomorrow would be better." "No, now." Teresa's tone surprised everyone. Mark blinked, confused. Patricia forced a smile, but there was tension on her face. "All right, I'll clean the kitchen." She left, but Teresa knew she would stay nearby, trying to listen. Teresa stood up, motioned for Mark to follow her to the garden. Outside, away from her daughter-in-law's ears, she took a deep breath. "Son, do you trust me?" Mark hesitated. "Of course, Mother. Why are you asking that?" "Because I need you to listen to me, truly, without interruptions, without judgment." Teresa took the letter from her pocket and handed it to him. "This is from your father. He wrote it to you before he passed away. But you never received it, did you?" Mark took the letter, confused. He looked at the handwriting, recognized it immediately. It was his father's script. He opened the paper with trembling hands and began to read. The more he read, the more his face changed. Confusion gave way to understanding, to pain, to contained fury. "Where did you find this?" "In the attic. Hidden, along with other things. My photo album, letters, documents. Everything I said was disappearing. Everything they made me believe I had imagined." Mark closed his eyes, pressed the letter against his chest. He was beginning to see. The pieces fit together painfully, revealing a picture he had always avoided seeing. The times Patricia answered for his mother, the times he felt guilty for no apparent reason, the control disguised as care, the lies wrapped in concern. "I don't want to believe it," he whispered. "I can't. I know it's difficult, but you need to open your eyes, Mark. For me. For you. For us." Before he could answer, Patricia appeared at the garden door, a fixed smile on her face but hard eyes. "Is everything all right out here? It's getting cold, Mrs. Teresa." "It's better to come inside." Mark quickly put the letter in his pocket. Teresa nodded but exchanged a glance with her son, a look that said, "Think about what you read. Think about everything." In the following days, the tension in the house was palpable. Mark was different. He observed more, spoke less. Patricia tried to maintain control, but felt the ground slipping beneath her feet. Teresa, for her part, continued to gather pieces. One night, when everyone was asleep, she managed to use the living room phone. She dialed the number Helen had left. Her friend answered on the second ring. "Helen, it's me, Teresa. Thank goodness, I was worried. Are you okay?" "I'm resisting. I found everything you told me about. The album, the letters, the documents. And I showed Anthony's letter to Mark. I think he's starting to understand." "That's good. Very good. But you need to be careful. If Patricia suspects you're gathering evidence, she might react, and it could be dangerous." "I know, but I won't stay silent anymore. I need your help. Can you identify these medicines she's giving me?" Teresa described the pills she had saved. Helen was silent for a few seconds. "They're strong sedatives, and one of them is used to cause mental confusion, memory lapses. They shouldn't be given to you without strict medical supervision." "She's drugging me. It seems so, and she probably forged medical prescriptions. This is serious, Teresa. We need to gather all the evidence and expose this, but carefully, very carefully. I'll keep observing, and I'll protect Mark too. He's involved in this, even without knowing it." They agreed on a plan. Helen would return to the house, but not as a caregiver. She would return as a friend on a social visit. Teresa would ask, her son to allow it. And if Patricia objected, it would be further proof of manipulation. Mark was beginning to question, and that would open doors. When Teresa hung up the phone, she turned and was startled. Patricia was there, standing in the shadow of the living room, watching. How long had she been there? How much had she heard? "Late night chat, Mrs. Teresa?" Patricia asked, her voice low, dangerous. Teresa raised her chin, refusing to show fear. "I called a friend. I have that right." "Of course you do, but it's not good for your health to stay up." "Late? Come, I'll take you to your room." Patricia held Teresa's arm more tightly than necessary. She led her to the room, handed her the night's medication. Teresa pretended to take them, but this time Patricia waited, watched carefully. "Open your mouth." Teresa obeyed. Patricia checked, nodded, satisfied. "Good night, Mrs. Teresa. Sleep well." The door closed, and Teresa heard the key turning in the lock. For the first time, she was locked in. Fear returned, but with it came something stronger. Determination. The war was declared, and she didn't intend to lose. Waking up locked in her room was a reality shock Teresa needed. There was no more denying it, no minimizing it. Patricia was not a zealous daughter-in-law. She was a jailer, and that house, which should have been a home, was a prison with beautiful walls and invisible bars. Teresa knocked on the door in the morning, called for help, but no one came. Only when she heard footsteps in the hallway, hours later, did the door open. It was Mrs. Yvonne with a breakfast tray. "You're not feeling well, Mrs. Teresa. Patricia thought it best for you to rest in your room today." Teresa looked at the caregiver, trying to find some complicity, some doubt in her eyes. But Mrs. Yvonne merely left the tray and left, locking the door again. Teresa sat on the bed, her heart racing. She needed to get out of there. She needed to talk to Mark. She needed to act before it was too late. Mark, meanwhile, was in his home office trying to concentrate on work, but without success. His father's letter echoed in his mind. The words seemed written for that exact moment, as if Anthony knew his son would need them one day. He looked at the photograph on the shelf, the image of his young, smiling father next to his mother on a sunny day. When had everything become so complicated? When had he lost the ability to see clearly? Patricia entered the study bringing coffee. She placed the cup on the table carefully, kissed the top of his head. "You're tense. Do you want to talk?" Mark hesitated. Part of him wanted to question, to confront. But another part, tired and confused, preferred to avoid conflict. He knew Patricia had ready answers for everything, justifications that always made sense on the surface. She was intelligent, persuasive, and he was exhausted. "I'm just tired, too much work." Patricia sat on the arm of the armchair, ran her hand through his hair. "I know it's difficult, but I'm here for you. I always have been. Everything I do is for us, for this family. You know that, don't you?" There was something in her voice, a calculated fragility, a tone that sought validation. Mark nodded, but said nothing. Patricia expected more, expected him to reassure her, but when that didn't happen, she stood up. "I'll take care of lunch, rest a bit." When she left, Mark pulled the letter from his pocket again. He read it once more. Every word was a warning, a lighthouse in the fog. He stood up, determined, and walked to his mother's room. He turned the doorknob. It was locked. His heart froze. "Mother! Mother, are you there?" "Mark," Teresa replied from the other side, relieved. "Son, get me out of here. She locked me in." Mark felt anger rise in his throat. He looked for the key, didn't find it. He went down to the kitchen where Patricia was preparing lunch. "Why is my mother's bedroom door locked?" Patricia turned calmly. "She was agitated this morning, confused. I thought it best to ensure she rested without going out and hurting herself." "You can't lock my mother in her room, Patricia. That's not right." "I'm protecting her. And us too. Didn't you see how she was last night? Making hidden calls, saying nonsense. She needs care, Mark. Care that I'm providing because you don't have time." Guilt. Always guilt. Patricia knew exactly where to strike. Mark felt the weight of her words, but his father's letter resonated louder. "Look to your mother, she will see what you cannot. Give me the key, now." Patricia stared at her husband. There was defiance in that gaze, but also fear. She realized she was losing control. Slowly, she took the key from her apron pocket and held it out to him. Mark took it without a word and went upstairs. He opened the bedroom door. Teresa was standing by the window, her eyes red from crying. "Mother, I'm sorry. I didn't know." Teresa hugged him, and they remained like that for a long moment. Mark felt his mother's fragility, but also her strength. She was fighting, she was resisting, and he needed to help her. "Son, we need to talk about everything without her around." Mark agreed. They went down together out into the garden. Teresa told him everything. The swapped medications, the hidden objects, the constant feeling of surveillance, the discredited memories, the progressive isolation. She showed him the pills she had hidden, the documents she had found in the attic. Each revelation was a stab to Mark's heart. How had he not noticed? How had he let this happen under his own roof? "I spoke with Helen," Teresa continued. "She confirmed that the medicines are strong sedatives, unsuitable for me. Someone falsified prescriptions, and the documents I found in the attic include powers of attorney I never signed, bank transfers I never authorized." Mark ran his hand over his face, trying to process everything. "I'll talk to her. Now." "No, not yet. We need more proof. If you confront her now, she might destroy everything. She might invent more lies. We need to be strategic." Mark nodded, but anger simmered within him. They agreed that he would feign normalcy while they gathered more evidence. Helen would return to the house as a visitor, and together they would plan the next steps. That afternoon, Mark called Helen. He briefly explained the situation, asked for help. Helen agreed immediately. The next day, she would arrive for a social visit, and Mark would ensure that Patricia would not prevent her from entering. When Helen appeared at the door, Patricia tried to block her. "I'm sorry, but Mrs. Teresa isn't receiving visitors today." Mark appeared behind his wife. "Yes, she is. Helen is my mother's friend, and she's welcome here." Patricia looked at her husband, surprised by his firmness. "But darling, I don't think it's a good idea. Your mother needs routine, predictability." "The decision is mine, and my mother's." Patricia backed down, but her eyes gleamed with contained anger. Helen entered and hugged Teresa. The two women went up to the room, and Mark made sure to leave the door open, a silent message to Patricia. That was free territory. In the room, Helen opened her purse and took out a small recorder. "I brought this. We need to record everything. Any compromising conversation, any admission. It will be our proof." Teresa nodded. Helen examined the medicines, photographed the documents, noted dates and times of suspicious events. The two compiled a detailed dossier. Meanwhile, Mark investigated, on his own. He accessed the family's bank accounts, discovered unauthorized transactions, money being transferred to accounts he didn't recognize. He called the bank, requested full statements, copies of authorizations. That night, when Patricia tried to give Teresa the medicines, Mark intervened. "Let me see those medicines." Patricia hesitated. "They're her medicines, the usual ones." "Let me see the prescriptions." Patricia went to get the prescriptions, but Mark already knew they were fake. He compared them with the packaging. The medications did not match. He confronted his wife right there, in front of his mother and Helen. "This isn't right. These aren't the prescribed medicines. What are you giving my mother?" Patricia paled. She tried to argue, but the words failed her. Mark picked up the phone, threatened to call the doctor. Patricia collapsed. She sat on the bed, covered her face with her hands. "I just wanted to help. I just wanted her to be calm, not to cause problems. I didn't want to hurt her." "But you did hurt her, Patricia. You drugged her, isolated her, made her doubt herself." Patricia's tears were real but laden with self-pity. "I didn't know what to do. I was scared. Scared that you would choose her over me. Scared of losing everything." Teresa, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "And out of fear, you destroyed everything. You destroyed trust, family, truth. Nothing justifies what you did." Patricia looked up, and there was the anger she had always hidden so well. You don't understand. You never understood. I built this house, this life. I took care of everything while he worked. And you come and threaten everything with your presence, with your demands, with your needs. I needed to control. I needed to ensure things continued the way I wanted. The truth finally came to light. It wasn't care, it was possessiveness, it wasn't protection, it was control. Patricia revealed years of insecurity, of fear of abandonment, of an obsessive need to dominate every aspect of life around her. She talked about her difficult childhood, about being abandoned by her parents, about building emotional walls so high that no one could cross them. And when Teresa arrived, those walls were threatened. Mark listened to everything, torn between compassion and revulsion. He understood her suffering, but he couldn't excuse her actions. Patricia needed help, but away from them, away from his mother. The night that followed the revelation was the longest that house had ever known. Patricia locked herself in her room, refusing to speak to anyone. Mark spent hours in the study, reviewing documents, bank statements, medical prescriptions. Each page was a new wound, a new betrayal. Helen stayed with Teresa, the two talking in low voices, processing everything that had happened. In the morning, Mark knocked on the bedroom door. Patricia, we need to resolve this. We can't go on like this. Silence. He insisted until she opened the door. She was unrecognizable. Her hair disheveled, her eyes swollen, her makeup smeared. She looked 10 years older in one night. What do you want me to do? Apologize, disappear? Just say it. I want to understand. I want to know why you did all this, and I want you to take responsibility. Patricia let out a bitter laugh. Take responsibility? You want to punish me, is that it? Turn me into the villain so you can feel like the hero? It's not about that. It's about the truth, about fixing what was broken. They went down to the living room. Teresa and Helen were already there. The tension was palpable, the air dense and suffocating. Patricia sat on the sofa, her hands clasped in her lap, her shoulders slumped. She seemed smaller, fragile, but Teresa knew that fragility could be deceptive. Mark pulled up a chair and sat in front of his wife. Let's start from the beginning. The documents, the powers of attorney, the bank transfers. Did you forge my mother's signature? Patricia remained silent for long seconds. Then she nodded slowly. Yes. Why? Because we needed the money. You didn't realize it, but we were in financial difficulty. Bills were late, investments weren't yielding, and your mother had unused resources just sitting there. I thought it wouldn't make a difference. You stole from my mother. I borrowed it. I was going to return it. Teresa intervened, her voice firm. You didn't borrow it. You took it without permission. That has a name, Patricia, and your justifications don't matter. You acted behind my back, forged my signature, manipulated legal documents. Patricia looked at Teresa with something akin to contempt. You have so much, and you do nothing with it. It's just stored away, gathering dust while we here make do as best we can. I thought I was being practical. Mark ran his hand over his face, exhausted. And the medicines? Why were you drugging my mother? To keep her calm, to avoid problems. She started questioning things, becoming suspicious. I couldn't let her discover the transactions. I needed to keep her confused, disoriented. You wanted to destroy her mind. No! Patricia stood up, agitated. I never wanted to hurt her. I just wanted to control the situation. I wanted everything to work my way. Don't you understand? I can't stand chaos. I can't stand losing control. Helen, who had been watching everything in silence, finally spoke. This isn't about control, Patricia. It's about fear. You're so afraid of being abandoned, of losing, that you end up destroying exactly what you want to preserve. Patricia looked at Helen with anger. And who are you to analyze me? You know nothing about me. I know more than you imagine. I've seen many cases like yours. People who suffered so much that they build emotional prisons and lock everyone inside. But in the end, you're the one who's most trapped. Patricia collapsed again, tears returning. You don't understand. No one understands. I grew up with nothing. No family, no stability. I was abandoned by my parents when I was 8. I went through foster homes, through people who pretended to care. I learned that no one stays, everyone leaves. And when I met Mark, when we built all this, I swore I wouldn't lose it. Never. I would do anything not to lose it. Mark felt his heart clench. He knew part of that story, but he had never known the extent of the trauma. Patricia had never let the depth of the pain she carried show. But now, exposed and vulnerable, she revealed old wounds that had never healed. "I understand your suffering," Mark said, his voice soft, "but that doesn't justify what you did. It doesn't justify manipulating, drugging, isolating. You hurt my mother, you hurt me, and you hurt yourself." "What are you going to do? Report me? Kick me out?" Mark hesitated. Part of him wanted immediate justice, wanted her to pay for everything. But another part saw the woman he had loved, broken and scared, asking for a chance. "I won't report you. Not yet. But you will return all the money you took. You will stay away from my mother, and you will seek professional help. Therapy, treatment, whatever is necessary. If you do that, if you show you're willing to change, maybe we can rebuild something. But it won't be like before." Patricia nodded, defeated. "All right." Teresa observed everything with mixed feelings. There was relief that the truth had finally come to light, but also sadness for all that had been lost. Trust was shattered, and even if Patricia tried to mend it, some cracks would never completely disappear. In the following days, the house underwent a transformation. Patricia moved to the guest room, maintaining her distance. She began looking for therapists, started the process of returning the money. Teresa regained her autonomy, began making decisions about her own life again, chose her own schedules, her own clothes, her own words. Helen continued to visit, not as a hired caregiver, but as a true friend. Mark and Teresa began to rebuild the bond that had been damaged. They talked more, remembered old stories, laughed together. Mark realized how much he had distanced himself from his mother, how much he had allowed other voices to speak for her, for them. He promised himself he would never let that happen again. One afternoon, while having tea in the garden, Teresa asked her son what he intended to do about their marriage. "I don't know yet, Mother. Part of me wants to end everything, erase this story, and start over. But another part remembers why I married her, remembers the good times. She's sick in a way that isn't visible, and I don't know if I should abandon her now that she needs me most. You have a generous heart, son, but generosity cannot turn into complicity. If you stay with her, it needs to be with clear boundaries, with the certainty that she is truly changing, not out of pity, not out of guilt." Mark nodded. He knew his mother was right. Patricia needed to show, through actions, that she was willing to face her demons, and he needed to have the courage to leave if that didn't happen. Helen, who was with them, smiled at Teresa. "You're different, stronger." "I am. Because I finally stopped doubting myself. I learned that truth doesn't need permission to exist. It exists regardless of who believes it or not." Teresa held the note Helen had given her, the one that said she wasn't crazy. She had kept it like a talisman during the most difficult days. Now she no longer needed it. She knew who she was, she knew her worth, and no one could take that from her again. That night, Teresa entered the room that had once been her prison and saw it with different eyes. It was no longer a place of confinement, it was just a room. And she had the key. She opened the windows, let the fresh air in, felt the breeze on her skin. She smiled. She was free, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. True freedom had always been an internal choice, a decision not to allow others to define her reality. Patricia watched from afar, from the guest room, through the crack in the door. She saw Teresa at the window, calm and serene. She felt envy, but also something different. Admiration. Teresa had gone through all that and come out whole, while she, Patricia, was shattered. Perhaps it was time to learn from the woman she had tried to destroy. Perhaps it was time to start rebuilding herself for real. The weeks that followed were of slow and painful reconstruction. The house, which had once seemed a scene of control and surveillance, began to breathe again. Teresa woke when she wanted, chose her own clothes, decided what to eat. Small things that had once been denied were now daily reconquests. Every decision, however small, was an affirmation of her existence, of her recovered autonomy. Patricia maintained the promised distance. She had started therapy and, for the first time in years, was confronting the traumas she had carried since childhood. It wasn't easy. Each session uncovered old wounds, brought to the surface pains she had buried under layers of control and rigidity. But she persisted. Not for Mark, not for Teresa, for herself. Because for the first time she understood that if she didn't change, she would lose everything anyway. Mark watched his wife from a distance, trying to discern if the change was genuine or just another mask. He wanted to believe, but broken trust isn't mended with words. It needs time, consistent actions, concrete proof. He had decided to give her that time, but had also set clear boundaries. Patricia no longer participated in decisions about Teresa. She no longer had access to his mother's accounts. She was no longer in control. One morning, Teresa woke up wanting to visit Notting Hill, the neighborhood where she had lived for so many years. She announced this at breakfast, and Mark immediately offered to take her. Patricia, who was in the kitchen, remained silent. In the past, she would have invented 1,000 reasons to prevent it. Now she simply nodded. "Enjoy your outing." Teresa and Mark drove through the streets of London to Notting Hill. The neighborhood was as she remembered, with its steep hills, colorful houses, bohemian pubs. She asked her son to stop in front of the building where she used to live. They stood there for a few minutes, just looking. Teresa felt a wave of nostalgia. That place held memories, loneliness, but also freedom. She had been alone there, but she was her own mistress. "Do you miss it?" Mark asked. "Some things, but not the loneliness. I learned that it's possible to be with people and maintain autonomy. The problem was never living alone or with others. It was allowing someone else to decide for me." Mark nodded, understanding the implicit lesson. They walked through the streets, stopped at an old cafe Teresa used to frequent. The owner was still there, older, but with the same warm smile. He recognized Teresa immediately. "Mrs. Teresa, I thought you'd forgotten about us." "Never. I was just sorting some things out." They sat at the corner table, the same one where Teresa had spent so many afternoons reading books and watching life go by. Mark ordered 2 coffees and they sat there talking. Not about Patricia, not about the problems, about the past, about his father, about stories Mark thought he had forgotten. Teresa laughed, remembered details, painted the past with vivid colors, and Mark realized how much he had lost by distancing himself from her. "Mother, I'm sorry for everything, for not seeing, for not listening, for letting this happen." Teresa held her son's hand. "You were blinded by love, by tiredness, by the 1,000 things in life. But you woke up, and that's what matters. We don't always see the traps when we're inside them. Sometimes we need someone from the outside to show us what we don't want to see. And what if I hadn't woken up? What if you hadn't resisted?" "But I resisted, and you woke up. There's no point in thinking about what ifs. We are here now, rebuilding. That's what matters." They returned home in the late afternoon. Patricia was in the garden tending to the plants. She saw the 2 arrive smiling, talking, and felt a pang of something she couldn't identify. Sadness, envy, regret, perhaps all mixed together. She approached slowly. "How was your outing?" "It was good," Mark replied. "Very good." Patricia nodded, bit her lip. "That's good. Teresa, can I talk to you for a moment?" Teresa hesitated but agreed. The 2 women went to the veranda. They stood in silence for a few seconds, the discomfort palpable. Patricia took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize truly. Not with justifications, not with buts, just apologies. I did horrible things. I hurt you, manipulated you, tried to erase you. And there's no excuse that justifies that. I was wrong. Completely wrong." Teresa observed her daughter-in-law. There was sincerity there, but also fragility. Patricia seemed like a child asking for forgiveness, not fully understanding the extent of what she had done, but wanting to be forgiven nonetheless. "I accept your apologies, Patricia, But accepting doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean we'll go back to being what we were, because we never really were anything. You created an image of a perfect, controlled family, but it was just an illusion. If you want to rebuild something true, it will take more than apologies. It will take real, sustained change, day after day. I know, and I'm trying. Therapy is helping me understand things about myself that I didn't even know existed. It's scary, but necessary. Teresa nodded. Then continue. Not for me, not for Mark, for yourself. Because you deserve to be more than your fears. The two women stood there side by side, looking at the garden. It wasn't complete forgiveness, not total reconciliation. But it was a beginning, a recognition that both were human, imperfect, capable of making mistakes and trying to fix them. Helen continued visiting regularly. She and Teresa resumed their friendship as if time hadn't passed. They talked for hours, reminisced about their youth, laughed at silly things. Helen brought a lightness that the house needed, an air of normality and genuine affection. One afternoon, while having tea, Helen commented on the transformation she saw in Teresa. "You're radiant, you look 10 years younger. I'm free, not just from the situation but from myself. For a long time I thought, I needed someone to complete me. First Anthony, then Mark. But I discovered that I was always complete. I just needed to realize it." Helen smiled, proud of her friend. "I always knew you were strong, even when we were young. Remember when you stood up to that unfair teacher in high school?" Teresa laughed. "I do. I was suspended for 3 days, but it was worth it. He never humiliated anyone in front of the class again." The two laughed, and the sound echoed through the house. Mark, who was in the study, smiled when he heard it. It had been a long time since he had heard his mother laugh like that. Free, light, true. He decided at that moment that he would do everything to preserve that freedom. Never again would he allow anyone, not even himself, to imprison her. Patricia also heard the laughter. She was in her room reading a book her therapist had recommended about attachment and abandonment. The sound of Teresa's laughter made her stop. She closed the book, leaned her head against the wall. She wanted to be part of that laughter, that lightness, but she knew she couldn't. Not yet. Maybe. Never. But she could try to be better, to build something new from the rubble of what she had destroyed. It was a beginning. That night, the house had a different dinner. For the first time in months, everyone was at the table together, but the dynamic was different. There was no tension in the air, no controlled words or suspicious glances. Each one occupied their space, respecting the other's space. Teresa talked about her visit to Notting Hill. Helen told funny stories about old patients. Mark commented on a new project at work. Patricia listened, participated when invited, but didn't dominate the conversation. She was learning to share, to yield, to exist without controlling. At the end of the night, when everyone had retired, Teresa remained alone in the living room. She looked at the house that had once been her prison and was now just a house. She thought of everything she had been through, all the times she had doubted herself, all the sleepless nights questioning her own sanity. She also thought of the strength she had found to resist, the courage she didn't know she had. She picked up Helen's note, the one she had kept as a talisman. "You're not crazy. The truth is all around you. Trust what you feel." She smiled. She no longer needed the note. The truth was no longer all around her. It was within her, and she would never again allow it to be questioned. 3 months had passed since the confrontation that had changed everything. The house in Kensington no longer looked the same. The windows stayed open longer, letting in light and air. The furniture had been rearranged, creating a more fluid, less controlled circulation. Small changes that made all the difference. The physical environment reflected the internal transformations of each resident. Teresa woke up early that June morning. The London winter was mild, but brought a pleasant coolness. She dressed herself, chose a blue blouse she liked, combed her hair unhurriedly. She went down to the kitchen and prepared her own coffee. Simple gestures that had once been watched, controlled, were now just gestures. Every day. Free. Mark was already in the kitchen, making toast. "Good morning, Mother. Did you sleep well?" "I did. I dreamed of your father." "Something good?" Yes, he was young, smiling. He told me he was proud. Of me. Of you. For having found the strength to face the truth. Mark hugged his mother. I'm proud too, of you especially. You were braver than I ever will be. Courage is not the absence of fear, son. It's acting despite it. You were courageous when you decided to see. When you confronted, when you chose truth instead of the comfort of illusion. They had breakfast together, talking about plans for the day. Teresa mentioned she wanted to visit an art exhibition in the city centre. Helen would accompany her. Mark smiled, happy to see his mother resuming interests, going out, living. It was as if she were being reborn, recovering pieces of herself that had been suppressed. Patricia came down to the kitchen a few minutes later. She was different. Less makeup, less rigid. She wore simpler clothes, less concerned with the perfect appearance she had always maintained. She greeted them both, served herself coffee, sat at the table, not in her usual place at the head, but in a side chair. Symbolic. How are you both today? Well, Mark replied. Mother's going out with Helen, and you, how's therapy? Difficult, but productive. My therapist helped me understand that controlling others was my way of dealing with internal chaos. I spent my whole life trying to create a perfect reality because the reality I lived in childhood was too chaotic. But perfection doesn't exist, and trying to force it only destroyed everything. Teresa listened in silence. She saw sincerity in Patricia's words, but also saw the long journey that still lay ahead. Real change didn't happen in 3 months. It took years, perhaps a lifetime. But the important thing was the willingness to walk, not the speed. I'm thinking of looking for an apartment, Patricia continued. I think it would be better for everyone. A space of my own where I can work on myself without the pressure of being here, without the ghosts of what I did. Mark was surprised. You want to separate? I don't know yet. Maybe just some time apart. For me to find myself, for you to decide if you still want this, if you can still trust me. It wouldn't be fair to ask you to stay with me out of pity or guilt. If we get back together, it has to be because we choose to, not because we're bound by obligation. Mark nodded slowly. It was a mature, difficult decision. Part of him felt relief. Another part felt sadness. The marriage he had known no longer existed. Perhaps it never truly had. But perhaps they could build something new, more honest, more healthy. Or perhaps it was time to let go. I think that makes sense. Let's do it, but calmly, with respect. You're still part of this family, Patricia. We're just redefining how. Patricia felt tears come, but this time they weren't tears of manipulation or self-pity. They were tears of liberation. She was letting go of control, the obsessive need to keep everything in order. And it was scary, but also liberating. Teresa observed the scene with complex feelings. She didn't feel pity for Patricia, but she also didn't feel anger. She felt something close to compassion. She saw a broken woman trying to put herself back together, and that deserved recognition. But not forgetting. Never forgetting. Later, Helen arrived to pick up Teresa. The two women left animatedly, talking about the exhibition they would visit. On the way, they stopped at a bookstore. Teresa bought 3 books, all by authors she had always wanted to read but had never prioritized. Helen bought one on gardening. They had lunch at a small restaurant in Mayfair, laughed, told stories, existed fully. In the afternoon at the art exhibition, Teresa stopped before a painting that touched her deeply. It was an image of an elderly woman from behind, looking out the window. But there was no sadness there, there was peace. The woman wasn't waiting for someone. She was just being. Teresa felt that image represented her. No longer the woman waiting, depending, doubting, but the woman who simply was, complete in herself. When they returned home, Mark was in the garden. He had spent the day reorganizing the plants, removing the dry ones, planting new seedlings. A symbolic renewal. Patricia helped, the two working side by side in comfortable silence. It wasn't the tense silence from before, but a silence of mutual understanding. Each one processing, each one healing. That night, Teresa went up to her room. She looked out the window, saw London illuminated in the distance, the hills silhouetted against the dark sky. She thought of everything she had lived through in recent months, the fear, the confusion, the silent struggle for her own sanity. She also thought of the strength she had discovered, the courage she didn't know she possessed, and she thought of the future which now seemed open, full of possibilities. She opened the bedside table drawer and took out Helen's note. "You're not crazy. The truth is all around you. Trust what you feel." She read it once more, smiled, and then tore the paper into small pieces. She no longer needed it. The message was etched within her. It was part of her now. She tossed the pieces out the window, watched them dance in the night wind before disappearing into the darkness. Symbolic, letting go of what was, embracing what is. In the months that followed, life found a new rhythm. Patricia moved to a small apartment in Richmond-upon-Thames. She continued therapy, started an art therapy course, something she had always wanted to do but had never prioritized. She and Mark met weekly to talk, redefine their relationship, decide if there was a future or if it was time to end that cycle. There was no answer yet, but there was honesty, and that was already more than they had before. Teresa flourished. She resumed attending reading groups, made new friends, traveled to places she had always wanted to see. Helen accompanied her on many of these adventures, the two laughing like girls, rediscovering life. Mark saw the transformation with joy and relief. His mother was no longer the fragile, silenced woman. She was a whole, vibrant woman, her own mistress. One afternoon, 6 months after the confrontation that changed everything, Teresa was in the garden when Mark approached. He sat beside her on the wooden bench. "What are you thinking about, Mother?" "How strange life is. I spent so much time thinking I needed someone to complete me. First your father, then you. But I discovered that I was always complete. I just needed to realize it. And now, are you happy?" "I am. But it's not a happiness that depends on external circumstances. It's a happiness that comes from within, from knowing who I am and being at peace with that. No matter what happens outside, no one can take that from me." Mark hugged his mother. "Thank you for teaching me that, for fighting when it would have been easier to give up, for showing me what it truly means to be strong." Teresa smiled. "Truth always triumphs, son. Not by force, but by persistence. I could have given up, could have believed I was truly crazy, but I chose to trust myself, and that choice changed everything." They remained there, in silence, watching the sunset tinge the sky with orange and pink. The house, once a scene of manipulation and control, was now a place of reconnection and restored dignity. The wounds were still there, slowly healing, but they no longer hurt with the same intensity. Time would do its work, and they would do theirs. To live, to grow, to forgive when possible, to always move forward. Teresa looked at the sky and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude, not to distant saints or divinities, but to life itself, which had tested her harshly and also given her the strength to resist. She smiled, at peace, free, finally, truly free. Dear listeners, we hope Teresa's story has deeply touched your hearts. May it remind you that strength often emerges in the darkest moments, and that trusting yourself is the first step towards any true liberation. If this story resonated with you, be sure to subscribe to our channel and activate the bell icon to receive notifications of new stories like this. Leave a like if Teresa's journey inspired you, and share your reflections, your own stories of overcoming and resistance in the comments. Every day, we bring narratives that explore the complexity of life, human drama, the struggle for dignity and true love. We have a special playlist with other emotional stories waiting for you. Find it here beside and continue with us on this journey. Your presence and participation make all the difference. Until the next story, and remember, you are not crazy. The truth is within you. Trust what you feel.